we're talking about having a language and label and things to hang your hat on. Am I right in saying that you have recently got a mental health diagnosis yourself, Lucy, and can we talk about that for a bit?
Yeah, of course. So I was diagnosed probably about a year and a half ago now. Most of it's been in lockdown, but with BPD, or borderline personality disorder. But it also goes by a myriad of other names. You've got emotionally unstable personality disorder, which is what they technically call it in the UK now. Yeah. And there's a group of American psychiatrists who are trying to get it renamed emotion regulation disorder.
Okay.
Which I think speaks the best to my experience.
Right.
But yes, that's what I have. I don't know how familiar you are with it, but it's a right roller coaster.
Yes. Right. Can you? What's it like from where you're sitting, Lucy? How have you experienced it? How has it affected you?
So, I would say calling it emotion regulation disorder really does justice to what it is. It basically means I feel the same emotions as any other normal human being, but I kind of lack the ability to temper them. Like when I'm happy, I'm ecstatic. When I'm miserable, I'm miserable. And it means it can quite often get misdiagnosed as bipolar, but these switches tend to happen far quicker, and they also tend to be brought about by feelings of abandonment or loneliness, and those are things that I find really, really difficult to deal with. So, yeah, it's like I feel the same things as everyone else, but, if I have a fight with my girlfriend about, using the wrong toothbrush, some people might get slightly miffed, go and make a cup of tea, and then come back. I will curl up in a corner and cry about the fact that I'm a terrible person and I didn't deserve to be loved in the first place.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it's quite a lot.
That's exhausting.
It's a lot, yeah. And I think that's what it is. It is just exhausting. Like, there will be days where the tiniest thing can just set me on a full emotional tailspin. And I think the hardest thing about it is that once I get myself in that dark emotional place, it is just impossible to claw yourself out.
Right.
That being said, there are benefits to it, or, not necessarily benefits, but I think like that intensity means I'm a really loyal friend. I care about people so deeply. I love deeply. I'm passionate. I'm a creative, and I think that probably partly comes from the fact that I feel things so deeply. And also, like, I'm an activist. I care hugely about, important issues and changing the world. And I think that probably has its roots in caring a little bit too much about pretty much everything.
Right.
But yeah, that's kind of BPD in a nutshell. It's exhausting and a roller coaster, but it's me. So, yeah.
A very important question I feel we need to ask is, have you watched Crazy Ex-Girlfriend?
The best television show of all time.
Okay. I knew it. I knew Lucy would have done.
I actually started watching Crazy Ex-Girlfriend before I got my diagnosis. And I remember watching it and being like, this very highly functioning, intelligent, cool, creative woman who is deeply unhinged really reminds me of me. And I just couldn't work it out. And then, about 3 series in, she gets diagnosed with BPD, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I should probably look into that. And lo and behold, a year later, there I was with a diagnosis. So,
singing the diagnosis song. There it is.
Yes, that's the one.
Yes. Oh, so good. So
yeah, it would have been a travesty if you hadn't seen it. We, at Invisible Cabaret, our core tenets, I'd say, is loving the show Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Oh, it's phenomenal. I love it. I think the other thing about Crazy Ex-Girlfriend is I'd never seen representation of a woman with mental health issues who was also so highly capable. I think so often there's this belief that, like, if you have a mental health issue or if you have a disability, that there are things you can't do. And obviously there are going to be, days where you're not capable of as much as everybody else. But I think it took me a long time to almost come to terms with the fact that I deserved a diagnosis, because I was like, but I functioned so well. And in reality, I didn't. I was losing friends. I had a really hard time like forging relationships with people, but I was doing really well at work, I was intelligent, I was doing well at university, like, and I think, yeah, there was something really liberating about seeing a woman who was highly successful, but also quite clearly had a serious mental health condition.
Right.
It's really interesting to hear you talk like this about a diagnosis such as BPD, because we all know that BPD is very highly stigmatized, isn't it?
It's honestly the worst. My mum is a doctor, and she worked as a psychiatrist for a long time. And when I first told her about my diagnosis, she was like, no, you don't, because that's the thing they diagnose people with when they know they're beyond help. And I was like, great, thank you.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm sure that's partly because she, you know, was training as a doctor in the 80s when it wasn't really understood.
Right.
I have a whole other realm of thoughts about this, about why it was so poorly understood. It's an issue that primarily affects women. I think it's something like 75% of cases are in women. And I think there's almost definitely a correlation between A, the intense stigma, but B, how long it took to find effective treatments for it. And I think it's because it was an issue that was primarily affecting women that the health system just didn't care to do anything about it. Even now, there are still doctors who won't treat people with BPD. I read an article the other day aimed at psychiatrists, and it said you're only ever one borderline away from losing your license. Like, somebody with this disorder will come in, absolutely ruin your practice, like forge a personal connection with you, and then ruin you. Like, there's this belief that people with BPD are like fundamentally manipulative, terrible people. And it's really difficult because I know it's a nightmare.
That is shocking.
There's also a great website called How to Train Your Borderline, which is for men with partners with borderline.
No.
Yeah, like How to Train Your Dragon, but for borderlines.
I hate that with every cell in my body.
Yeah, it's difficult, and I don't understand it, but at the same time, I know that because of my emotional intensity, there have been times where I have acted in really, really destructive ways, but that doesn't mean that anybody with this condition should be beyond help or should be treated like that. And I think there's often a tendency in people who are slightly more high functioning with something like BPD to almost see themselves as the good borderlines. Like, I am a borderline, but I'm a good one. You know, I'm not one of the bad ones who goes around hurting people or doing terrible things. And I hate that. Yeah. Because I know there is a world where if I hadn't received help, I probably could have found myself in a really dark place where that emotional intensity could have led me to dangerous or damaging behaviours.
Right.
But yeah, like, even down to the presentation of borderlines in film, like, I think if you Google like famous borderlines, something like 70% of them are murderers. Like,
oh, great, cool, nice.
Yeah. If you talk about borderlines, people automatically go, "Oh, cruel intentions. That's borderline personality disorder."
Oh,
like, it's like people who murder, women who murder out of jealousy, are pretty much always either written or coded as having borderline personality disorder.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, combine that with like queer coding and the stuff that goes on there and the just general misogyny, like, there's a lot happening here.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a whole theory about when doctors used to diagnose women with hysteria, probably that's what would nowadays be called BPD. BPD is modern day hysteria. It's crazy woman disorder.